Jenny Miller had a routine. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't romantic, but it was hers. She woke up every morning at 4:45 a.m. in a creaky one-bedroom apartment above the pharmacy. The streetlight outside her window flickered like it couldn't decide whether to live or give up. A metaphor Jenny found oddly comforting. By 5:15, she was dressed. Faded jeans, soft flannel, hair pulled back in a low, easy knot. By 5:30, she was inside Rosie's diner, tying the same old blue apron around her waist. The bell above the front door always jingled with a slight delay. The air inside always smelled of black coffee and hash browns. The regulars always sat in the same seats. Harold, the retired mailman, by the window. Marcy and Leo from the hardware store near the counter. And old Mr. Talbot, who never spoke but tipped an exact change. Jenny greeted them all with soft smiles and light steps, like someone trying not to disturb the stillness of morning. No one ever asked her if she was okay, but then again, she never gave them a reason to. It was a Tuesday in October when she first saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 10. Skinny, quiet, eyes too grown up for his age. He came in just after 7, tucked into the farthest booth like he didn't want to be seen, but hoped someone might notice him anyway. He ordered only a glass of water. When Jenny brought it over, placing it gently on a paper napkin, he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. No smile, no thank you. Just that flicker of acknowledgement. The next morning, he came again. Same time, same booth, same silent request. Asterisk, that is overthinking. Now asterisk, by the third day, Jenny didn't ask. She just brought the water and placed it down with a softness that said, I see you. By the second week, she knew his rhythm. He'd arrive precisely at 7:15. He'd sit with a too big backpack beside him and an old paperback open on the table. He never ordered food. He never looked up, but she could see it in the way his eyes followed the plates of pancakes and eggs carried past his table. He was hungry, painfully, quietly hungry. On the 15th day, Jenny made a mistake. Or at least, she pretended to. She came out from the kitchen holding a plate of pancakes and set it down in front of him like it was an accident. Oh, sorry, she said gently, brushing hair behind her ear. The cook made an extra,
I'll just eat
it here instead of throwing it out. The boy stared at the plate like it was a trick. His eyes darted up to hers, suspicious, guarded. It's okay, she whispered, already stepping away. Sometimes they mess up the count. She didn't look back, but from behind the counter, she watched first. He glanced left, then right, then slowly, cautiously, picked up the fork. 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, and his book was still open, his eyes glued to the page with such deliberate stillness. It broke her heart a little when she came to clear the dish. He didn't meet her eyes, but he whispered something so soft she almost didn't catch it. Thank you. And that became their ritual. Every morning, Jenny accidentally brought an extra plate. Scrambled eggs. One day, oatmeal the next. French. Toast when she could sneak it. He never asked. She never explained. It was a quiet kind of understanding. A kindness with no spotlight. Harold raised an eyebrow after a few weeks. Who's the kid? He asked. Between sips of coffee? He your nephew or something? Jenny wiped down the counter, pretending not to hear. Just a hungry morning soul, she replied vaguely. Does he pay? She shook her head. He eats. Kathy, who worked the grill, pulled her aside once. You're feeding a stray, she said. Not unkindly, just blunt, like always. You know they disappear eventually. You give 'em too much, they don't learn nothin'. Jenny only shrugged. It's fine, she said. I used to be that hungry too. Kathy blinked. That was the most personal thing Jenny had said in 3 years. No, one pushed after that. The boy still never gave his name, and Jenny never asked. But in a diner where things rarely changed, he became a quiet fixture, like the bell above the door, or the warm hum of the coffee pot, or the soft way Jenny smiled just a little more when she saw him each morning, and every time she placed the plate in front of him, he'd give that tiny nada, a thank you, a connection. a thread tying to lonely lives together without ever speaking it aloud. And then one morning, before the sun had finished rising, before the first egg hit the grill, before Jenny could even untie her scarf, the diner parking lot filled with the sound of engines. Not one, not two, but 4 black SUVs pulled up in perfect silence. Doors opened, and everything changed. Let that moment settle in your chest. We'll find out who came for the boy. Why? In the next part, Jenny stood behind the counter, half-tied apron hanging at her waist, hands frozen on the register drawer. The soft flicker of neon from the Rosie's Diner sign bled through the windows in shades of faded pink and warm cream. But outside, the black SUVs looked like they'd been carved from shadow. 4 of them, all identical, not Kansas plates. The doors opened in near unison, and out stepped men in suits. Not cops, not feds. At least not with badges. Something else. Their posture wasn't aggressive, not loud or hostile, but intentional. Sharp eyes, coordinated steps, as if they were used to being obeyed without needing to ask. Jenny felt her stomach twist. Not from fear, exactly, but from something deeper. A shift in the atmosphere, like gravity, had slightly changed. The bell above the door jingled softly as the first man entered, then the second, then the third. The last one held the door for a moment. And that's when Jenny noticed the boy, the quiet one. He stepped through the doorway like he didn't even need to look like this diner was already mapped in his mind. The same booth waited, back corner, just like always. He walked straight to it, no hesitation. Only this time, the backpack was gone. The book too, just him, smallframe.com face. Guarded eyes. The man who entered last approached the counter. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and a leather coat that looked far too expensive for this town. "You're Jenny Miller?" he asked in a tone that was soft, but final. She nodded slowly. "May we have the booth in the back, Jenny?" Glanced past him. The boy was already seated, waiting. She nodded again and gestured gently, her voice barely audible. Of course, her heart thudded quietly beneath her ribcage. She wasn't sure why something was happening, something layered and long in the making, but she didn't yet know whether she was part of it, or simply a witness. The men sat around the booth too, on either side, one across from the boy. Only the silver-haired one remained standing. He turned toward her. "He tells me you've been feeding him." Jenny blinked. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said simply. "Just breakfast." The man smiled, but not in a way that reached his eyes. "How long?" "About a month." "Did he say who he was?" "No. Did you ask?" Jenny shook her head. He was hungry. A pause. The man studied her like she was a puzzle with fewer pieces than expected. Then he gave a slow nod and walked to the booth. Jenny moved behind the counter, trying not to watch too closely, but she saw the boy glance up at her just once, and in that one flicker, that brief, fleeting moment, something passed between them. Not fear, not regret. Something else, almost like sorrow. 15 minutes passed. The men barely spoke. They ordered nothing. Jenny poured a cup of coffee and brought it quietly to the table, placing it in front of the silver-haired man. He nodded, still saying nothing. The boy didn't touch it. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes distant, expression unreadable. At exactly 7:45, they all stood. The man closest to the door left cash on the table, too much for coffee, too little for a bribe, and then they left. As silently as they'd come, the boy was the last to go. But just before stepping out the door, he turned back. His gaze met Jenny's, clear, steady, and then, for the first time, he spoke. "Thank you for seeing me." That was all. Then he was gone. Jenny stood motionless in the empty diner. The coffee pot hissed quietly behind. The jukebox clicked into the next track, an old blues song no one had played in weeks. And in that fragile silence, Jenny felt something ache deep in her chest. She didn't know his name, not really. She didn't know why he was here or why he left that way. But she knew what it meant to be invisible, and she knew that for a little while she had made someone feel like they existed that afternoon. When the lunch rush slowed and the sun warmed the metal stools by the window, Jenny wiped down the boys' booth slower than usual, there under the napkin holder. It was a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. 4 words, written in neat, careful script. You saved me first. Let that settle now. Feel it like a warm hand on your back in the cold. Tonight, let's stay close to thee. Warmth that kindness creates. It doesn't take much. A plate of pancakes, a glass of water, or a quiet gesture that whispers, I see you. Jenny kept the note. She folded it neatly, slipped it into the small recipe box she kept beneath the register, the one no one else ever opened. It was where she kept the things that mattered, tiny moments, small things, lost buttons, letters. That never got mailed, the photograph of her father's hands on the wheel of his truck. Long before everything had gone quiet, that note. It felt like a whisper from the universe. You saved me first. She read it every morning for a week. The boy never came back. Days passed, then weeks. No one asked about him. No one in town mentioned a child missing or men in suits. In its slow, sticky rhythm, the coffee still brewed at 5:30. Marcy still gossiped about the hardware store's inventory. Mr. Talbot still left exact change on the counter. But for Jenny, the diner felt different now, like a room where someone had turned off the music mid-song. She found herself glancing at the corner booth, not in hope, just in habit. Her eyes would drift and her chest would tighten, like something important had left through the back door without saying goodbye. One morning, as November turned the leaves to gold and copper, Harold broke the silence over his coffee. You ever wonder what that boy's story was? Jenny looked up, caught off guard. Harold sipped slowly. The quiet one. The one with the book. You seemed close. Jenny nodded once. I still don't know his name, she said softly. Strange, ain't it? Harold muttered. How someone can pass through your life like a gust of wind and leave it different somehow. She didn't reply, but in her chest, something ached quietly in agreement. 2 months passed. Snow came early that year, dusting the sidewalks and frosting the windows of Rosie's diner like icing on a gingerbread house. Business slowed. Locals kept to themselves. The world folded inward. Jenny spent more time by the window, fingers curled around warm mugs of coffee during breaks. She'd catch herself staring at the horizon line, as if expecting something to appear over the rooftops. She told herself to stop waiting. She'd done what she could. She'd been kind, and maybe that was enough. But some stories don't end just because we think they should. It was a Wednesday when the letter came. No return address, no stamp, just hand-delivered. Left at the diner's back door under a stone. She found it after closing. When she stepped out to toss the trash and noticed something smooth and out of place against the cold metal step, a white envelope, heavy inside, was a letter written on crisp linen paper, folded perfectly. The handwriting was the same, careful, deliberate, and as she read, her hands trembled again. Dear Jenny, you were the first person in a long time who looked at me and didn't see a problem or a name or a rumor. You saw someone human, someone worth noticing. I was sent to your town for reasons I didn't fully understand. I wasn't supposed to speak to anyone. I wasn't supposed to trust anyone. But every morning, there you were, with that same quiet smile, with a plate you pretended someone else ordered, with warmth I hadn't felt in years. I never told you who I was. Maybe I still can't. But I want you to know something important. You reminded me that the world can still be kind. You taught me that even in silence, you can speak. And one day when you least expect it, I'll repay the debt. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Until then, stay warm. Keep smiling. The world needs more people like you. See? Jenny stood in the alley long after she finished reading, breath fogging in the cold. See, she traced the letter with her fingertips, like it might vanish if she blinked too long. She didn't need to know the rest, not really. The why, the how, the men in suits. the mystery behind. His eyes, she only knew this. Her small act had mattered to someone, somewhere, and maybe that was everything. Back inside, she made a quiet decision. The next morning, she brought out a small sign from under the counter. It was handwritten, taped to the wall beside the window booth. "No one sits alone here." Harold raised an eyebrow when he saw it. "You starting a club?" he teased. Jenny just smiled. "Something like that." So it began. A new kind of. Ritual students from the nearby school began drifting in. Not many, just one or two at first. Tired-looking kids with shadows under their eyes. Girls with headphones pulled over messy buns. Boys who didn't say much. They sat at the booth. Red wrote, sometimes cried, and Jenny always brought them something warm, an extra plate, cinnamon. Roll, a mug of cocoa with too much whipped cream. No one ever asked, she just gave, and slowly, without fanfare, the booth stopped being just a booth. It became a haven. And the boy, see, he didn't return. Not that year, not the next, but sometimes when the wind blew a certain way, or when the morning sun lit up the counter just right. Jenny swore she could still feel the echo of him, sitting there reading, waiting for pancakes that weren't ordered. Settle in deeper now. Let your breath soften, because what comes next is quiet. But powerful. The snow came heavier that January. It muffled the streets like a blanket over a restless child, softening every footstep and silencing the wind as it passed along the shutters of Rosie's diner. Jenny arrived early as always. The bell above the door jangled softly, her boots wet from the slush outside. The windows fogged with warmth, the fryer hissed faintly, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air. The sign by the booth still hung where she'd placed it weeks ago. No one sits alone here. And true to its promise, there was always someone. A teenage girl scribbling poetry into a spiral-bound notebook. A boy with nervous eyes who only ordered tea. A local foster kid who barely spoke above a whisper, but smiled now when Jenny brought him toast with raspberry jam. The booth had become something more than a table. It had become a pause in the chaos. A breathing space for anyone who felt unseen, and that made it sacred. That morning was no different. Until 10:37 a.m., the bell above the door rang, and then walked a woman, late 30s, maybe early 40s, dressed simply, dark jeans, a long wool coat, snow-dusted boots. Her face was familiar, in that way that made you pause. As if you'd seen her in a photograph or heard her voice once in a dream. She stood just inside the door. Looking around, Jenny met her gaze with a soft smile. "Take any seat you'd like," she said gently. But the woman didn't move. Instead, she pulled something from her coat pocket, a small, folded piece of paper, worn, creased in the corners. She held it up. "Did you write this?" Jenny's breath caught. It was her handwriting. The sign, "No one sits alone here." "Yes," she said slowly. "I did." The woman gave a slow nod and walked to the counter. Slipping onto the stool usually saved for Harold, who wasn't in yet, Jenny poured her a cup of coffee. Even though she hadn't asked, the woman smiled softly. "He told me about you." Jenny's hand paused mid-pour. "Who?" "See." The name or the single letter wrapped around Jenny like a forgotten melody. She said nothing, only handed the coffee gently. Both hands around the cup as she slid it forward. The woman warmed her fingers around the mug and exhaled slowly. "I was his guardian. Assigned, not chosen. Not in the way families choose. But over time, I suppose I did choose him." Jenny waited, not sure if she should ask anything at all. The woman continued, "He's safe. That's what I came to say. He's okay." Beat. "Past, he talks about you. Still, often, said your booth was the first place he ever felt human again." Jenny looked down, blinking away the prickle behind her eyes. "I didn't do much," she whispered. The woman smiled gently. "You didn't need to do much. That's the point. You didn't ask for his story. You didn't push. You didn't expect him to perform his pain. You just fed him." Jenny nodded. "He was hungry." He was more than that, the woman said softly. He was alone. He'd been alone for so long he didn't recognize softness when it showed up. Jenny looked over at the booth. It was empty just now, but she could still feel the warmth it held. The way stories linger even when their tellers are gone. The woman reached into her coat again and placed a small velvet pouch on the counter. He asked me to give you this. Jenny stared at it. The woman nodded. Double quotes, open it when you're ready. Then she stood, finished her coffee in one last sip, and placed a crisp 20 on the counter. Thank you, Jenny, for giving him something even. We couldn't. And just like that, she was gone. Jenny waited until the diner was quiet again. Then she untied the pouch slowly. Inside was a key. Attached to it was a tiny engraved tag. Nothing flashy. Just 3 words. Booth is yours. At first she didn't understand, but 2 days later a letter arrived. This time with a return address, an attorney's office, Denver. Colorado inside was a deed. Property ownership, the booth, and the portion of the diner that housed it had been purchased in Jenny's name. He wanted to make sure no one could ever take it away from you, the letter said, and that no one would ever sit alone there without your permission. Jenny pressed the letter to her chest. The tears came then, quietly like snow falling in the early morning, soft, gentle, healing after the rush that day. She changed the sign. She wrote it in fresh ink. Bigger this time, Booth C, where no one sits alone. Harold noticed it first. That new? Jenny just smiled. It's always been there. It just has a name now. And in the next part, someone returns to the booth years later, carrying the next chapter of C's story. And a message Jenny never expected. 5 years passed. 5 snowy winters. 5 long, hot summers, and the Booth C remained. It had become something of a legend. Jenny never advertised it. She didn't post about it. There were no signs outside Rosie's Diner, but people found it anyway. Teenagers whispered about it after school. Few lonely truck drivers made detours just to sit there. Even Marcy from the hardware store eventually sat in that booth one rainy day, crying quietly over a picture of her son she hadn't spoken to in years. And Jenny? She just kept doing what she always had, pouring coffee, making pancakes, showing up kindness. She believed didn't need to be loud to be powerful. One late September afternoon, when the sunlight poured in golden through the front window, a young man walked in, maybe early 20s, black jacket, dark jeans, a tiredness in his eyes that came from something deeper than a long road. He didn't speak when he entered, just walked slowly to Booth C and sat down. Jenny noticed the way his shoulders rested, not tense, not afraid, but like he had reached a place that held memory. He placed something on the table. A notebook, old, worn edges frayed. A ribbon tucked into the middle. Jenny approached. With her usual calm smile, "Coffee?" The young man looked up. His eyes were familiar. Not in the way strangers sometimes are, but in the way someone becomes part of your life without warning. He nodded. Just once, and Jenny's heart did something quiet. She didn't speak, didn't ask. She just returned with a full mug, placed it gently in front of him, and set down a plate of pancakes, the same kind she'd once accidentally given to a boy who never asked for them. He stared at the plate for a moment, then gave the tiniest smile. "He told me about you." His voice was low, like it had been held back for a while. Jenny tilted her head slightly. "Who?" The young man tapped the cover of the notebook. "See?" Stillness moved through her. 5 years, no word, and now this. "I was in the same program," the young man said. "Different city, a different timeline. But we crossed paths later." Jenny stayed quiet. He continued. He never talked much about what happened before, about where he'd been. But when he finally opened up, it was this place he mentioned first. "The diner," she asked softly. "You?" He corrected. "He said you didn't try to fix him. You just gave him pancakes." Jenny smiled, brushing the corner of her eye with the tip of her finger. "Sometimes that's all someone needs." The young man nodded. "He passed away last winter." Jenny's breath caught. not from surprise, but from the ache that comes. When you realize a chapter has truly ended, he left this for you, the young man said, sliding the notebook across the table. Jenny looked down at it, his fingers trembling. He said, "She saved me without asking why. That kind of love deserves to be remembered." Jenny didn't open it right away. She just sat there, across from this stranger who wasn't really a stranger anymore. And together, they shared pancakes in silence. When he finished, he placed a folded piece of paper beside the notebook. "He wanted you to have this too." Then he stood, nodded once, and walked back out into the golden afternoon. Jenny didn't stop him. Some moments, he just let pass, gently, gratefully, when the diner closed that night. Jenny sat alone in booth C. She opened the notebook. Inside were journal entries, letters never sent, pages and pages of thoughts, some short, some long, some messy and crossed out, but every few pages. Her name appeared, Jenny, a moment described, a plate remembered, a cup of coffee that made someone feel alive again. She cried quietly, not with sobs, not with heartbreak, but with something deeper, grief and gratitude, because in a world that had taken so much from C, he had chosen to leave something behind, and she had been part of that. The folded paper, it was a deed transfer. The rest of the diner in her name, "It's yours now," the note attached said. "Let the kindness continue. Booth C is only the beginning." And in the next part, Jenny makes a decision that transforms Rosie's diner into something more, sanctuary that touches thousands. Jenny sat in the booth long after the lights were off, the notebook open. Before her, the deed resting beside it, the night pressing gently against the frosted windows. She ran her hand slowly across the worn wooden tabletop, the very table where it had all begun. A boy got a plate of pancakes, no questions asked now. A legacy by spring, Rosie's diner began to change. Not with renovations, no flashy remodels, no new branding, no overpriced coffee machines. But with intention, Jenny installed a new shelf by booth. See, on it were books, all donated, fiction, memoirs, sketchpads. A sign above read, "Take one, leave one, or just rest a while." The wall beside it became a canvas of thank you notes. Some handwritten, some printed from emails, others just drawings from children. And every Saturday afternoon, she kept a table open for quiet guests. That's what she called them. People who didn't want to talk, but needed to be there. People who carried invisible weights. She didn't ask their stories. She just brought them warm food. The staff followed her lead. Kathy, the grill cook, stopped calling it handouts. She began making cinnamon toast for the foster kids without waiting for a ticket. Harold brought in old radio, parts to teach curious teens how to build something with their hands, and slowly word began to spread. One day a journalist from a Kansas City blog came through town. She had planned to stop for 20 minutes, just long enough to grab a slice of pie on her way back to the city. She left 4 hours later. She wrote an article titled, "The Diner Where No One Sits Alone." It went viral. Suddenly, people from neighboring towns started showing up, curious at first. Quiet, but then something strange began to happen. They stayed, not just for the food, for the feeling that something here mattered, that they mattered. Jenny never let it get to her head. She still swept the floors each night, still started the coffee pot at 5:30 a.m., still brought a napkin and a soft "here you go" to anyone who looked lost. And when people asked about Booth C, because they always asked, now she would just smile gently and say, "It started with a boy. I gave him breakfast. He gave me a reason." They didn't always understand what that meant, but they always felt it. Later that summer, something unexpected happened. Jenny was sitting out back, under the shade of the diner's old oak tree, sipping iced tea and watching the light move slowly across the parking lot. A little girl approached, maybe 7 or 8, skinny knees, untied shoelaces, and the kind of wide eyes that held too much worry for her age. She held out a paper plate with a single cookie. "For you," she whispered. Jenny smiled softly. Thank you, sweetheart. What's this for? The girl looked down at her shoes. Mom says you gave us pancakes when we had nothing. I wanted to give something back. Jenny blinked. Her throat tightened. What's your name? Lena? Well, Lena, Jenny said, taking the cookie with both hands as if it were a treasure, this is the kindest gift I've had all year. The little girl smiled. It was shy, it's a little broken, but it was real. Later, as the stars came out and the diner lights glowed soft against the night sky, Jenny sat once again at booth C, dot the cookie on a napkin before her, the notebook nearby, pages, worn with memory, and she whispered, not to anyone in particular, just to the air, you did good, kid. Your kindness didn't end with you. And in the next part, Jenny receives a letter from across the ocean. A story unfolds that ties her quiet diner to something far bigger and far more beautiful than she ever imagined. It had been nearly a year since. The young man delivered the notebook. Jenny still kept it close, tucked under the register or in her small canvas bag she brought home each night. Every so often, she'd open to a random page and let herself remember. Not mourn, just remember the way C had sat, the way he held his fork like he wasn't sure the meal would still be there. By the next bite, how his thank yous were barely whispered. Like, words were something he was still learning to trust. Life moved gently in Maple Hollow. A rhythm of pancakes, morning coffee, and golden sunlight through the diner windows. Jenny had become something of a legend herself now. Not that she ever played the part. She still wore the same worn sneakers and tied her apron the same way every morning. But people came from farther now. It's not for fanfare. For Booth C, they didn't always know why. They just felt something when. They sat there like being heard without saying a word. It was a rainy Tuesday in early autumn when the letter arrived. The envelope was thin, the paper foreign with soft ivory texture and a blue wax seal shaped like a feather. Jenny turned it over in her hands a few times before opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, elegant, slanted cursive, ink that looked like it came from a fountain pen, and a photo, black and white, slightly faded. A boy younger than C had been, standing in front of what looked like a small schoolhouse built from brick and wood. Behind him, on the wall, a plaque. Jenny leaned in. It read, "The C Foundation for Quiet Children with Loud Stories." She sat down slowly in booth C, fingers trembling just enough to make her pause before unfolding the letter. Dear Jenny, you do not know me, but you have changed the lives of many children in my village. My name is Amari. I run a small education center for displaced youth in northern Kenya. Last year we received a grant, unexpected, generous, and deeply moving. It came from a foundation bearing a name we'd never heard, yet quickly came to honor, the C Foundation. Attached to the funding was a single request that the first meal served at the school each morning include pancakes. Every day when we asked why, the response was simple. Because someone once fed me pancakes when I was invisible. We did not understand then, but now I do. Your name was in the Foundation's archive. Jenny Miller, Kansas, USA. The original act of grace. I wanted to write to tell you this. You are remembered. Every child who eats here begins their day with a warm plate, and every plate is, in a way, passed from your hands across the sea. There is more to the story, I'm sure. But even if I never know it all, know this. You are part of our family now, in kindness. Amara. Jenny sat very still. The rain outside whispered against the windows. The diner was nearly empty. Just Harold snoozing gently by the window, and a student in headphones. Sketching quietly in a notebook, she looked again at the photo. The boy, his smile, the plaque, a building full of life. Because of pancakes, because of C, because of a moment that happened right here, so many years ago, with a plate she never meant to deliver. Jenny placed the letter in the notebook, tucked it into the back. Flapdot closed the cover gently, then walked into the kitchen. Kathy, she said quietly. Yeah, hun. We're adding a new item to the specials board. Kathy wiped her hands on a towel and waited. Jenny picked up the chalk. Her fingers were steady now. She wrote in a flowing script. The World Pancake. Many stories, all proceeds go to kids who once sat alone. Somewhere, Kathy read it, then nodded slowly, her throat thick. We'll make it extra sweet. And in the next part, someone returns to Maple Hollow with one final gift. A truth Jenny never expected. In a final chapter that brings peace, closure, and new beginnings. Some endings don't close the story. They open something new, and when the kindness you gave circles back to you, it doesn't shout, it simply sits down, quietly says, I remember. The leaves had begun to fall again. Maple Hollow in autumn was a postcard, golden reds and sleepy oranges lining the sidewalks. Children kicking through piles on their way to school, and the scent of something baked always floating somewhere in the air, inside Rosie's diner. Booth C remained full most mornings. People came not just for the pancakes anymore, but for what the place had become. A quiet shelter in a loud, tired world. Jenny had learned not to ask why someone sat alone. Sometimes it was a breakup. Sometimes it was a death. Sometimes they didn't even know themselves, but the pattern was always the same. They came in quiet and left feeling seen. On the first Thursday of October, the bell above the door rang, and Jenny looked up, expecting Harold or one of the regulars. But it wasn't a local. It was a man in a dark wool coat, neatly pressed, maybe in his early 50s. Sharp eyes, but kind, like someone who'd lived through things but didn't let bitterness take root. He scanned the diner slowly, and then he saw the sign, Booth C, where no one sits. Loney smiled, walked over and sat down. Jenny approached with a fresh pot of coffee. Long drive, she asked gently. He looked up, eyes settling on her. Longer than I expected. Worth it, though. She tilted her head, curious. He reached into his coat and placed something on the table. It was a photo of her. Jenny blinked. Where did you get that? He carried it, the man said softly. See, it was tucked into the back of his journal. Jenny sank into the seat across from him. The man didn't rush. My name is Daniel, he said. I was C's mentor for a time. Later, I became the executor of his estate. She echoed, still processing. He nodded. He didn't have much, not in the usual way, but what he did have, he gave away. Jenny looked down at the photograph. It was taken through the diner window. She was laughing, holding a coffee pot. Mid-pour head tilted back, just slightly. The sunlight had hit her hair just right. It looked warm. Real? She didn't even remember the moment. He said, Daniel continued, this is what safety looks like. This is what trust looks like. Jenny's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. He never told me any of this, she whispered. Because he didn't need to, Daniel said gently. Some things we don't speak aloud, because they're too important. He reached into his briefcase and handed her a sealed envelope, her name written on the front. Just Jenny. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single handwritten line. You saved the part of me that still believed people could be good. Thank you for not needing to understand me before you cared. Jenny folded the letter and placed it beside the photo. Her eyes stayed on both for a long time. Then, very softly, why are you here now? Daniel smiled again. Because I promised him I would come, when everything he started had finished growing, and has it? He looked around the diner at the photos on the wall, the pancake, fundraiser board, the little shelf of books by Booth C, and the two teenagers currently sketching quietly at the window. He nodded. It has. Jenny stood, poured him a cup of coffee, set it down slowly with a soft smile. Then you should stay for breakfast. Daniel chuckled. I thought you'd say that. She brought him pancakes, the same kind, the original kind. He took a bite, closed his eyes. I get it now, he said. They really are magic. Jenny smiled, her hand resting briefly on the edge of the booth. They're just pancakes, not the way you serve them. And in the next part, the town gathers one evening for a quiet celebration. Booth C receives one final tribute. Jenny steps into something she never planned, a future that carries. Sees kindness farther than either of them ever dreamed. It was early November when, Jenny decided there wouldn't be a statue, no plaques, no museum walls, but there would be light, so she planned a gathering just one evening. No flyers, no online posts, just quiet conversations passed hand to hand like folded notes between friends. Thursday night, she told people, Booth C after closing. That was all. No one asked why, because they already knew that evening. The diner glowed from within like a lantern in the dark. Warm light spilled through the windows, falling gently on the fallen leaves outside. Inside, it was hushed, not somber, just peaceful. The chairs were filled. No one talked loudly. They shared space the way old friends do when words aren't needed. At 7:15, the exact time C used to arrive all those years ago, Jenny stood behind the counter, her apron folded. Neatly on the hook behind her, she stepped out quietly, walked to booth C, and placed a single candle on the table. Lit it then? A plate, pancakes stacked, soft and golden, with just a drizzle of syrup and a paper straw resting beside it, exactly how she'd served him the very first time. She didn't speak, but the room understood in the silence. People stood one by one and walked gently to the booth. Some placed something small on the table, drawing a folded note, a photo, a little wooden heart with the word hope etched into it. Some just placed their hand on the edge for a moment, then sat back down. Even Harold, slow with age now, stood with his cane, touched the booth with reverence, and nodded quietly to no one in particular. Then the door opened. 4 black SUVs pulled into the lot, but they weren't imposing. They were respectful. Out stepped a woman in a long navy coat, a teenager holding a journal, and 2 men in dark slacks with foundation pins on their collars. They weren't here for tension, they were here for him. See, Jenny walked to the teenager first. The girl was tall, maybe 16, confident but gentle. She held the journal tightly. "You're her," the girl said softly. "Who? The one he wrote about? You're Jenny?" Jenny smiled gently, eyes glistening. "And who are you?" "His sister." Jenny's breath caught. He never told me he had. We didn't grow up together. Different homes, different stories. But he found me, found all of us. Then he found you. And you reminded him how to come home, to people again." Jenny placed a hand lightly on the girl's shoulder. "He did more with his story than most ever do." The girl nodded. Double quotes, he said, "You gave him back the part of his heart that still worked." That's how he said it. He wanted me to meet you someday. She handed Jenny the journal. "This one's for you." Later, after most guests had gone, Annie sat alone in booth C. The plate was empty now, just syrup remnants and the candle flickering low. She opened the second journal slowly. The first page held only a title.
Ow.
The Diner That Didn't Ask. Questions by C? She smiled softly, then turned to page 1. And in the next part, Jenny begins a new chapter. A gentle decision that changes how Rosie's diner will run forever. And a whisper of love from C's past shows up when she least expects it, bringing the story full circle in the most unexpected way. When you give without asking, you plant something no one can take away. It grows in the lives you'll never meet, and sometimes it finds its way back home. For weeks after the gathering, people kept leaving small things in booth C, some folded notes, some little crafts from children, even a button, one woman said, was from her late father's coat, because this booth helped her feel like he was still nearby. Jenny didn't clean them away. Instead, she left a wooden box beneath the table, painted soft blue. A sign above it read, "Leave a story. If you need to, take a moment if you're tired." The box filled quickly. Some notes were one word: help, grieving, trying. Others were full pages long, stories of homes left behind, of second chances, of finding one moment of peace in the scent of maple, syrup and warm bread. Jenny read each one when the diner closed, not to fix anyone, just to witness. She'd always said she didn't need recognition. She meant it. But something inside her stirred when she read the last few pages of C's second journal. They weren't about him. They were about her. Jenny never raised her voice, never asked me why I was broken. She just fed me. It was the most natural thing in the world. I think that's what made it healing. She didn't serve pity. She served pancakes. If I ever become someone worth remembering, it's because someone once looked at me and saw a human being before they saw a problem. Jenny closed the journal slowly, then opened her phone and made a call by spring. Rosie's Diner had a new program. They called it the Second Table Project. Every day, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. 2 booths were set aside for anyone who needed a meal and a moment of dignity. No cost, no questions. And every Friday, local volunteers read notes from the blue box aloud with permission while Kathy served warm banana bread and cider on the house. It wasn't loud, wasn't fancy, but it changed things. People talked to each other who might never have crossed paths otherwise. Veterans sat beside high schoolers, new moms next to retired welders, a lonely nurse beside a poet with calloused hands and a notebook always half full. And once, a woman who'd once been fed pancakes by Jenny years ago during her divorce came back not for food, but to apply as a dishwasher. I want to stay where kindness lives. She said Jenny just handed her an apron. Then one summer morning, something unexpected. A man in his mid-30s walked in with a worn leather duffel and a crooked smile. He sat at the counter, ordered black coffee and French toast. Nothing strange, until he looked around and asked gently, "Did this place used to have a kid named C come through here?" Jenny's hand stilled. "It did," she said. "You knew him?" The man smiled. "He was my brother." Jenny placed a hand over her heart. "Another piece he changed this place," she said softly. "He told me about it," the man replied. "Said this diner saved his life. Said there was a woman here who fed him before asking his name." Jenny gave a small, teary laugh. "That sounds like him." "I never got to say thank you," the man said, "but I figured maybe I could show it." He reached into his duffel and pulled out a check. Not from a bank, from a foundation. "There. Building shelters now," he said. "Quiet places for kids who run out of safe homes. We want this diner to be the model for how it should feel." Jenny was silent for a moment, then whispered, "C really left a map, didn't he?" The man nodded. "He did. And you were the starting point. And in the next part, Jenny has offered something she never imagined, a national spotlight. But she must choose between staying small and warm or expanding the light. What does a legacy really look like when it begins with one plate of pancakes? You don't always recognize the beginning of something big when it's small, but when the warmth keeps spreading, you know it was never small at all. It was mid-autumn. When the call came, Jenny had just locked the diner door and was wiping down booth C when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it ring, but something, soft nudge in her chest, made her answer. "Hello. Hi. Is this Jenny Miller of Rosie's Diner in Maple Hollow?" "Yes. This is Claire Whitmore. I'm a producer with Heart of America, the show on PBS. We feature real stories of kindness, second chances, and people quietly changing the world. We came across your story. We'd like to do a segment on you." Jenny sat down in booth C slowly. A camera crew, a television show, felt strange, off balance. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't polished. She made waffles and kept napkin. "Dispenser's full. I'm not sure I'm the right fit," she said softly. Claire laughed gently. "Actually, we think you're exactly the right fit. You fed a child for weeks without knowing his name. That child went on to change the lives of thousands. I want to start the story where it really started, with the pancakes." The next few weeks were a blur. There were interviews. Quiet. Filming. B-roll shots of the diner opening before dawn, of Jenny pouring coffee, of kids reading in booth C. They filmed the blue box. They filmed the Second Table Project. And most of all, they filmed Jenny being exactly who she was. Simple, gentle, real. When the episode aired, something incredible happened. Not overnight, but steadily, softly, like the tide rolling. And letters came from all over the country. Some were handwritten by people in their 80s. Others were crayon-colored pages from third grade. Classes who'd watch the episode with their teachers. I want to grow up to be like Jenny. We started Pancake Fridays at school. Thank you for seeing people who feel invisible. One school in Vermont renamed their cafeteria the Jenny Table. A bakery in Portland started a quiet morning hour in her honor, low lights. Soft music, no rush. Even cafes in Europe began messaging. Kindness had become contagious. And yet, Jenny never changed much. She still lived in the same apartment, still walked to work in the same shoes, still tied her apron the same way. But she started writing at night, little pages of memory, snippets of the journey. She wasn't trying to write a book, just trying to hold the pieces. Each time she wrote, she thought of C. Then one evening, as the diner emptied out, a letter arrived by hand. An older woman in a forest green coat pressed it into Jenny's palm and said, "He wanted you to have this? I was his therapist. He asked me to wait 1 year after his passing before delivering it." Jenny opened it that night in booth C with a cup of tea in trembling hands. It read, "Jenny, if you're reading this, then you've already done more than I could have ever repaid. But I wanted to say one last thing. What you gave me wasn't just food. It was belief. Quiet, non-judging, stubborn belief. You believed in the version of me I hadn't met yet, and because you did, I got to meet him. Now he builds homes and shelters and writes letters like this one. Thank you for seeing someone who didn't yet know how to be seen. Booth C isn't just a table, it's a door. Let people walk through it always." See, Jenny sat with that letter for a long time, not crying, just still. And in the next part, Jenny is asked to speak at a national gathering for youth foundations. She doesn't think she can until someone unexpected shows up, reminding her that her voice, even soft, can still echo far. Jenny stared at the email for nearly an hour. Subject, keynote. Invitation National Summit for Youth Foundations. Message was kind, encouraging. It mentioned how C's story had sparked new initiatives nationwide. How Rosie's Diner was being called the birthplace of a quiet revolution. How the organizers believed her voice, soft, untrained, unfiltered, might be exactly what people needed to hear. She closed the laptop, not because she was saying no, but because she wasn't sure how to say yes. Kathy found her out back that night, sitting on the loading dock behind the diner, coat pulled tight against the breeze. "You get that speaking thing they emailed about?" Kathy asked, lighting a cigarette but not smoking it. Jenny nodded slowly. "I'm not a speaker." "Neither was C," Kathy replied, then smiled. "But he spoke anyway. With buildings, with books." With that notebox under booth C, Jenny exhaled. "What if I mess it up?" "Then you mess it up. But you'd still be the woman who fed a lonely boy without needing to know who he was." They sat in silence. Sometimes that said more than advice ever could. When Jenny stepped onto the stage a month later, she wore no makeup, just her cleanest apron, her soft blue cardigan, and a tiny paper straw tucked in her pocket like a lucky charm. The room was huge, rows and rows of chairs, people in suits, people in jeans, students, teachers, activists, founders, all quiet. Waiting, Jenny stepped to the mic, took a deep breath, then spoke. "I fed him pancakes. Not because I was brave, but because I'd once been hungry too. And someone fed me. He never told me his name, never told me his story, but I saw it in his eyes. The kind that darted too fast, like they expected the world to flinch. I didn't fix him. I didn't try to. I just served him food like he belonged there because he did. And from that booth, he built something that stretched farther than my little town could ever imagine." She paused. The lights were warm, but her voice stayed steady. "You don't have to know the whole story to be part of it. You just have to meet people where they are without asking them to prove their pain. That boy left this world with a legacy. But before that, he left me something too. The reminder that quiet doesn't mean small, it just means deep." She stepped back. The room stayed still for a moment, not because they didn't care, because they did. Then gentle applause. A few people stood, then more, then all. Afterward, a teenage girl waited nervously by the edge of the stage. Jenny noticed her, walked over high. The girl said, "I wanted to say, I've been skipping meals and hiding a lot. It's your story. Made me want to sit down again somewhere." Jenny smiled gently. "Then I hope you find your booth, see? What if I don't?" Jenny reached into her tote and handed her something. It was a small notebook, blank pages, and a note inside. "If you can't find it, build it." Back in Maple Hollow, the diner remained unchanged, but people came more often now, to sit, to eat, to write notes, to believe again. Jenny never got used to the attention, but she accepted it, not as famed as gratitude, echoing home, and in the next part. A letter arrives that Jenny never expected from a place C once visited on a quiet winter trip. Inside is a final message, one that brings Jenny face to face with a truth she hadn't yet dared to dream. They just need to be real. And remembered, the first snow fell quietly that year. Not the kind that stings or blinds, just soft. Powdered light resting gently on rooftops and window panes. Jenny had started leaving. Booth C set with a place each morning, napkin, fork, and a tiny folded note that read, "If today is heavy, sit here." I won't ask why. It often went unused, but somehow never untouched. Someone always brushed the table with their fingers, or placed a folded drawing, or left a tea bag with a handwritten "You're okay" beside it. The booth had become more than a seat. It had become a shelter. Then one morning, just after sunrise, a letter came in the mail. No return address, just Jenny's name. Inside, a crisp envelope, a photograph, and a postcard from a place she didn't recognize. The photograph was simple. C, standing alone in front of a snow-covered cabin, hands in his pockets, eyes soft, distant, a wool cap pulled low. The back of the photo read, "I came here when I couldn't breathe in cities. There's peace here. I wanted you to see it someday." Jenny unfolded the postcard. It showed the cabin again, framed by pines. With smoke curling from the chimney, the message was short. "If you ever want to rest. The key is under the flat stone beside the step. I left books inside, and tea." No signature. Just a drawing of a small heart with steam rising from it. Like a cup of coffee. Like home. Jenny sat with the photo in her lap for a long time. That morning customers came. Coffee was poured, bacon sizzled, but part of her remained with the letter with the mountains. The man who once sat quietly sipping water before school. Weeks later, on her day off, Jenny packed a small bag. She didn't tell anyone exactly where she was going. Just left a note on the diner's door. "Gone to breathe. Back soon. Be kind to each other while I'm gone." And she drove past fields, past cities, up winding hills until she saw it. The cabin, just like the photo, she found the flat stone easily lifted it there, like promised. A brass key inside the cabin was simple warmth. A stack of logs by the fireplace. Kettle beside the stove. A blanket folded at the foot of a small bed and on the table. A third journal, this one labeled Booth C, the way back Jenny sat. Opened it. Inside was only one page, handwritten in the familiar narrow scrawl. "Asterisk if you're here, you're tired. That's okay. You carried more than anyone saw. You poured into people even when you felt empty. But now, sit, drink something warm. Listen to the fire crackle. You gave me a way forward, so I built you a way back." Asterisk, she read it twice. Then again, then made tea. Wrapped herself in the blanket, sat by the fire, and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to cry. Not because she was broken, but because she was full. And in the next and final part, Jenny returns to Maple Hollow changed. Not louder, not bigger, just steadier. She passes on one last gift, and Booth C receives its final visitor, a child with eyes just like C once had. Jenny returned to Maple Hollow quietly. No announcement, just the bell over the door, jingling like always. Harold looked up from his stool and nodded once. Like nothing had changed, but his smile lingered a little longer that day. Kathy handed Jenny her apron without a word, her eyes glistening. "You found what you needed?" she asked, wiping a plate. Jenny folded the apron over her waist. "I found what I'd forgotten to need." Business at Rosie's diner kept steady. People still came for the pancakes, but most came for the feeling, like they'd just stepped into someone's memory booth. C remained open, always. A soft candle rested on the edge. The little blue box beneath it was now full of letters from around the world, some even in languages Jenny couldn't read, but she understood them anyway. Love didn't need translation. One Thursday morning, just before the rush, the bell above the door chimed. Jenny turned. A boy stood in the doorway. Maybe thin, small backpack, hands gripping the straps. His coat was too light for the cold. His eyes darted toward Booth C, then toward her. She smiled. Hungry. He nodded once. "Booth C's open," she said, voice like a blanket. He walked slowly to the booth and sat down. Jenny brought him water, and a plate of pancakes appeared a few minutes later. No fuss, no words. As he began eating, not fast, but cautious, Jenny slipped a napkin beside his plate. Folded inside, a paper straw, just like old times. He glanced at it, then at her, and nodded the same. Barely visible nods he used to give. Jenny's chest filled with quiet warmth. Later that day, as the light began to fade and the kitchen slowed, Jenny sat in Booth C alone. The plate was clean, the boy had gone, but his presence lingered like all of them did. C, the sister, the man with the duffel, the girl from the summit, the ones who came for a place to breathe. She looked out the window, watched the snow start to fall again. A fresh beginning. That evening, she taped a new note above the table, asterisk, to whoever sits here next. You are not too late. You are not too much. And you are not alone. Asterisk at closing time. Jenny turned off the lights, but left the candle at Booth C glowing, not to keep the place lit. Just so someone looking for it, even in the dark, would know. There is still warmth here, there is still kindness here, and there is still room for you. At this table,